Bismillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah.
Allahu Akbar.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, everybody. Peace be upon you. So this is our first event that is not Eid or is not Jumu'ah. This is our first community event. A little bit of background for those of you who are new to the community. We were trying very hard for a very, very long time to establish like a community center, a masjid that could be like a community center. And this year, in March the 31st, we were finally able to purchase this building. And when people think of mosque, they think of a prayer hall. Usually they think of a prayer hall with men with big beards and thick eyebrows and angry faces. But we want to show Pembrokeshire and the rest of Wales that that's not what a mosque is. That's not what a masjid is. A masjid is somewhere where men, women, children, old, young, everybody attends. We were very close to purchasing a building on Dark Street, an old Freemasonic hall. And I personally was very upset when that deal fell through. But Haji Abdul Manan, mashallah, he gave me some good advice. My Sajda, she gave me some very good advice, and she said that, words to the effect that Allah is the Fattah. He's the one who opens the doors. And if this door is closed, another door is open. And the door that was opened was the door to Cherry Grove. And look at the Eid celebration we had. We had a celebration with hundreds of people, a prayer with hundreds of people, food and merriment and happiness that we couldn't have had even if we had got the building in Dark Street. And we certainly couldn't have had in the old masjid that we had for such a long time. So today this event was meant to be like an introduction to who we are, what our vision is, and also a fantastic opportunity to highlight something that is very real in my life and in the lives of your children. And that is that Muslims growing up in the West, they encounter a unique issue that doesn't really exist in other Muslim countries. And that issue is the crisis of identity. When Brother Muhammad Chowdhury contacted me and sent me an email about his book, I quickly went away and downloaded it online and had a read of a few chapters. And it was like, it could have been a chapter from my life. And so I think it's wonderful that we have an opportunity to discover these issues, because a lot of the times they're private, secret issues that youngsters have to overcome themselves without ever speaking to anyone about it. And I think it's wonderful that this is a book about the border crossings or the many different crossroads that we find ourselves on as Muslims. Are we Muslim? Are we British? Are we European? Are we Eastern or Asian or whatever it might be? We have a different life outside the house. We're different people inside the house. We're different people at school. We're different people in the masjid. So I think it's a very important topic to discuss, so that our children don't have to have the same crisis of identity that we had. So just a little introduction to Brother Mohammad Chowdhury. He is from East London. He is from the Bengali community in East London. He went to university in Oxford, He works for PwC, which is called PricewaterhouseCoopers. It's one of the big four accountancy companies, and he is a partner in Australia, and also an author now, mashallah. So if I can invite you onto the stage. Thanks for that.
Assalamu alaikum. Can you hear me? Yeah, brother Mustafa, thank you for welcoming me, and everybody, thank you so much for hosting us here this evening. I didn't realize it's your first public sort of event apart from Eid and Ramadan and Jummah prayer, so I feel it's quite a special night, so thank you very much for having us. Thank you. So I think what I'll do, if it's okay, is pick up from where brother Mustafa took us, and if I may take some of your time, I'd like to just share with you the story, if you like, of my border crossings. And by doing that, I'd really like to try and link with your stories where I can. And I'd be really happy for you to interrupt, ask questions, or we can have some questions towards the end. I'm really quite easy, whichever way. And I'm accompanied by my son, who's just gone to the car to get me a bottle of water, but got one already now. That's great. And my son is just standing there at the back. He's a 14-year-old young man there. He'll also be just at the back, and we'd be really happy to sign books and give them to you as well as we go. So I'll just start by maybe picking up the story. So I was born in London from Bangladeshi parents, born in the late 60s, and grew up in southeast London. My father had come here in 1957 from Sylhet in Bangladesh. For those of you who are Sylheti, আমার আব্বা মানে বালাগঞ্জ থানা বাড়ি, বালাগঞ্জ থানা আর গ্রাম মুক্তারপুর। আব্বার নাম আছে Mohammad Chowdhury, Shahid. So my father came in 57 and he worked at King's Cross Station, railway station, for about 9 years. So he came from, I mean, my surname is Chowdhury, as you've seen on the book. Chowdhury means landowner. So if you go back to Bangladesh or India or Pakistan, you know, pre-British partition, pre-partition, the Chowdhurys were basically people who were the landowners, and my forefathers were all landowners. But in the 1950s, the land was taken away from them, rightly so, because they had too much land for their own good. The land was taken away from them, and the new government started setting up ways to collect tax rather than through landlords. And so people like my father's family, all of a sudden, they had been very wealthy, but all of a sudden they had no access to money. So my dad, aged 21, came here. And it's a typical immigrant story. And then my mum came here in the early 60s. We were born in the late 60s, myself and my sister. And we grew up in an environment where our parents were very much assimilating themselves into Britain. So they all had jobs. They were all very much trying to make their way. But they were also very keen to maintain an element of identity. So our rule was that we had to speak Bangla at home. And we started to learn how to be Muslims right from a very young age, which was all fine. But what I found, what I found was that even from a young age, I felt a bit like an outsider. And I felt like an outsider for obvious reasons, if you like, growing up in London, which is that there weren't that many brown-skinned kids at school and so on, so I naturally felt a bit like an outsider. But the funny thing was, I felt like an outsider in my own family as well. So whenever we would go to Bangladesh for holidays, which is pretty much every summer, the relatives in Bangladesh would refer to us as English, because they would say, "Oh, you're the English one. You know, you can't speak Bengali properly, and you can't pick. You can't eat the food properly with your fingers. So they would basically say things like that. So whilst we were making a big effort to be as Bengali as possible for our family, and don't get me wrong, we were loved by the family. There was a lot of love, but there was also that feeling that you're not really one of us. And the same way amongst England, you know, there was a lot of affection from my school. There was no dislike of us, but there was a real feeling that you were a bit different. And so I think there was this element of growing up feeling a bit like an outsider. Now, let me just try and fast forward a few years, and I'm going to gradually bring you back to why I wrote the book, and I'll read a couple of extracts as well. But let me just fast forward a few years. Let me fast forward to when I'm in my mid-30s. So it's early 2000s, and as Brother Mustafa was saying, you know, I'm a partner in a big consulting firm, PwC. I run the telecoms media and tech practice for the firm in the Asia Pacific region. I live in Melbourne now. Back in 2002, 2003, I was based in London, and I was doing a lot of work in the Middle East. So I was doing a lot of work advising the Saudi government and the Oman government and other Arab states on opening up their telecom sectors. And as Brother Azaz mentioned, we even lived in Egypt a few years later, when I worked for Vodafone. So anyway, so I'm in the Middle East, I'm doing a lot of work in these countries, and I'm constantly hearing Arabic, because I'm sitting in meetings, I'm hearing Arabic. Now, I've learned how to read Arabic when I was a kid, and I've learned how to pray in Arabic, and I could even recite, you know, 10 or 15 minutes of Quran to you now, you know, in Arabic, because I learned it off by heart. But I didn't understand Arabic. And this had caused some frustration to me, even when I was a kid. We used to ask our parents, why are we learning to do something when we don't really understand the meaning? And they said, no, read the translation, you can read the translation. And I would, because I was a bit of a pain in the neck as a kid, you know, I would say, I don't really, I can read the translation, but I don't still understand what these words mean. I can read the translation, see what is the meaning, but I don't really understand the words. So I always carried this frustration around with me, which I think did cause me some issues. Now, I'm in the Middle East, I'm hearing a lot of Arabic, and I thought to myself, I'm going to go and learn Arabic now. So I actually signed up to an Arabic class at the School of Oriental and African Studies. And in about a year and a half, I just became fairly fluent in Arabic. So I learned quite a lot of Arabic grammar. It took me about a year through the class. At the end of that, I said to my teacher that, you know, because Arabic is a language that's, it's very grammatical, but the spoken Arabic is different to how it's written down. So I said to my teachers that, look, I can't really speak Arabic. So they said, okay, well, you need to go somewhere to learn how to speak conversational Arabic. So I decided to take Damascus as my option. This was way before the war. Because I thought, if I go to Dubai, I'm just going to meet people who speak English the whole time, or Urdu, or Hindi, or Bangla, some language that I can speak, so it's not going to work. So I thought Damascus is the best option. I won't have any way but to speak Arabic. So I went to Damascus for 3 weeks, completely immersed myself with a language teacher into Arabic. And then I made several other trips. And within a year and a half, I was fluent. Then I started writing. So I started making trips to Jordan, the West Bank, Lebanon, Syria, and Turkey, and started writing. And I put my writing together, and I sent it to this journalist. Some of you might have heard of him. He was called Robert Fisk. He used to be the chief Middle East correspondent of The Independent newspaper. Right? He just died a year ago. I sent it to him. And I had no intention to write a book, by the way. I just sent him the writing. And he wrote back to me. This great thing about Britain is that you get in touch with people or institutions, and sometimes you get a response. It's pretty amazing. He wrote back to me, he wrote me a letter, and he wrote me loads of feedback on the writing. And he said something. I met him then. He wanted to meet me, so I met him face to face. I met him a couple of times. And he said, Mohammed, you're not Mark Twain. So Mark Twain is the famous 19th century American novelist who lived in Damascus and wrote. He said, you're not Mark Twain. He said, you can't write about Damascus like Mark Twain. I said, okay, no problem with that. He said, however, you are something that Mark Twain isn't and I'm not. which is he said, because you speak a lot of languages and because of the colour of your skin, partly because of your faith, you earn people's trust really quickly. And he said, I bet you do that wherever you go, not just when you go to the Middle East. I bet you get the same thing when you go to Africa or Asia. You are just able to get people's trust really quickly. And he said, you're able to do that, which means you can get inside people's stories in a way that I can't. And you write reasonably well. And what you write, we trust, because you think like a Westerner. So we trust what you write. You know, you're not selling us a story. You're just telling us how it is. And he said, that's actually quite unique. So he said, you need to do something with that. And then he just left me. So that's when I thought, okay, I probably need to write a book. So that's what started it. And what I started doing was, I started thinking about, why is it that I've got this insight? What created this condition whereby I get that insight? And what I thought was that it goes back to childhood, and it goes back to how, like, you know, I was saying to you before that I felt a bit like an outsider, whether I'm in Bangladesh or whether I'm here. I think it really goes back to that. So what happened there, can I just tell you the story for a few more minutes? So what happened there is that when I was feeling like an outsider, and I didn't think like this when I was aged 9, I'm just thinking about it afterwards and rationalizing it to myself. I'm thinking, when I was a kid, feeling like an outsider, I wasn't alone. Many of my relatives, cousins, friends were feeling the same. We weren't alone in this. What happened is, typically, is one of two things. One is that the person like me would feel under a lot of pressure and would basically decide, right, well, I can't deal with this pressure anymore. I want to feel on the inside. I mean, all of us want to feel like we belong to something. So what did my friends do, or what did my relatives do? Some of them said, right, well, I'm gonna throw my lot in with my friends at school, and I'm gonna be like them. And that's that. So we start drinking, start partying, start mixing in a way that we don't worry too much about the cultural traditions or the religious traditions that our family has tried to instill upon us, but we're happy. We integrate and we're happy. And I'm not going to make a judgment on that, by the way. We're happy. Others would take a different approach. They would say, I'm really going to integrate with my family. So I'll have a life that means that I more or less stick to my Muslim traditions, my religious traditions, my cultural traditions. I won't worry about my career. I won't worry about doing other things. I'll live in England, but I will live that sort of life. And we know there are hundreds of thousands of migrants who live like that in many countries. And that's that. And they have their life. And I have cousins or relatives who are 40, 50 years old like me who have lived that life for the last 30 years. And they're happy with that life. And again, I'm not passing a judgment on that. But for me, I didn't think either of those answers was the right answer for me. Because I believed a lot in my faith. But I also believed in having a life that I wanted and that this country offers. And I felt that was completely right to want that life. So I wanted both. And I think that was what pushed me to thinking about that path where I could somehow have everything. And I think that's what ended up with me getting a comment from this journalist saying you're able to get in and convey it in an honest way. So that was really what I think drove me to write the book. Do you mind if I read some things? I mean, if you want to ask a question, please put your hand up as well. So I've just got a few markers here, and I'm going to be guided by you how much and what I do. But let me just start with a little extract from the sort of introduction part of the book. So, throughout my life and career, I've occupied the cultural no man's land I've been stuck in ever since school days. This extends to today, living and working in an Australia that is undergoing its own, sometimes fractious evolution into becoming a genuinely multicultural society. But as time went on, I became aware that living with cultural ambiguities breeds advantages in communication and empathy. Border Crossings is my journey, but the narrative is my way to relate to your journey. This is regardless of whether you happen to be a Muslim, happen to be of any faith or of no faith at all, whether you are a man or a woman, British or of any other nationality, because we live in a world where we're exposed to being some form of the other, some of the time, and most of the time for many. My journey has been one of understanding, accepting, and benefiting from being treated as an outsider. It has taken a few knocks to appreciate it, but I've discovered that the hardship of being the other is also one of life's hidden privileges. So I feel as though, even though I've written the book as from a Muslim perspective, or the perspective of a Western Muslim, I feel as though it's this theme of other, which doesn't necessarily apply only to Muslims. It actually applies to many types of people. It applies to people with the gender issue, with LGBT issues, race issues, not necessarily just a sort of like a Muslim issue. Muslim perhaps is just an example, and that maybe the example that I've had most of in my lived experience. Of course, pre 9/11, I would say, most of that experience was actually more racist than Islamic, to be honest, because the Islamic issue really came up maybe in the last 20, 25 years. Before that, when we were kids, it was more to do with racism than religion. So, now, I wanted to have an opportunity to maybe explain a bit about some examples of what that meant for me and what dilemmas that created for me, if you like, some real examples. But before I do that, let me just pause and ask if there's any questions before I maybe read a couple of other extracts. So any questions or comments even?
I would like to know how, you mentioned how 9/11 changed, the shift from just plain racism to religion. How, living in London at that time, I assume, and particularly after 7/7, how has that sort of narrative changed? And or are you going to go into that?
No, please carry on. I'm just looking for a section to pull out from. I think the narrative, thanks for your comment, for your question. I'll try and read a bit as well. So I think the narrative did change. I actually thought about it, and I reckon it started changing well before 9/11. So I reckon the changeover point was the Iranian Revolution, when the Ayatollah Khomeini took power in Iran. That was 1980, about 20 years before 9/11. We were kids then, I was like 13. But I remember when that momentous occasion happened, when the Ayatollah came down the stairs from the aeroplane, and there was this revolution and in Iran. I remember from that point onwards, the whole concept of Muslim identity, I think, started becoming more visible, if you like. Certainly in my family, I remember before the 80s, very few men had beards. I remember I grew a beard in 1986 when I was in my first year at university. And I remember having a bit of a long beard. I only had it because I was being a bit lazy and wasn't shaving. And I remember going home for the holidays. And my dad, my uncle, none of them had beards then. They were criticizing. And they were actually saying, what the hell have you got this beard for? Get rid of this beard, you look really silly. And women didn't used to wear hijab, for example. Very few women would wear hijab. If you look at family photographs of migrants in the 1970s, very few women in hijab. Now, all of a sudden, from the early 1980s, it just changed. So I think Muslims started having more of a feeling about being a bit more confident with their identity, their physical identity. So I think that by the time 9/11 happened, of course, many things happened in between, like Afghanistan and Al-Qaeda, etc., etc. I think by the time 9/11 happened, the switch was quite quick. There was all of a sudden, I think the things changed quite quickly. For me, it impacted me hugely because I average, and I still do, apart from COVID years, 120 flights a year. I've worked in 86 countries physically, and I average 120 flights every year. I mean, in a big year, I'll fly 800,000 kilometers, right? So for me, 9/11 was huge because I immediately started getting stopped at airports And in 2005, my name was put on the United States no-fly list for no reason other than that if you remember, I was telling you I was learning Arabic. So I had an Arabic textbook in my bag, and I flew to Dallas for a meeting from London. I used to work for IBM in those days. And I got off the plane in Dallas airport, and the US border officials sort of said, oh, can we just look through your bag? I'm a British citizen, no visa required for going to America back then. And yeah, so they were looking through my bag, and they found the Arabic textbook, and they saw this textbook, and they opened it up, and it was all Arabic writing. It was a vocabulary, basically. But unfortunately, these guys looked at this, and they were like, and their eyes lit up, and they thought, oh, we've got something here. The next thing I knew, after an hour of questioning, is that the next day, when I was let go then, I went out, but the next day, I checked in for a flight to Atlanta, and they wouldn't give me a boarding pass. And then I thought it was a bit weird. They gave me a boarding pass after asking a few questions. The next day, I was flying from Atlanta to New York, and again, they wouldn't give me a boarding pass. So then I said, is there something wrong, And they said, your name is on the United States Department of Homeland Security checklist. So we have to ask some questions before we can let you have a boarding pass. So then I found out that it had gone on that week. So for me, 9/11 impacted me quite a lot. And maybe that's a prompt for me to read one little bit, if I may. So this is, the book's called Border Crossings, and it's meant to be both the metaphorical border crossings in the sense that it's the cultural border crossings to address, but it's also, in our case as Muslims, we also have quite a lot of physical border crossing issues as well. So I'm going to read you a physical border crossing issue, and then maybe we go back to some of the other ones. Heathrow Airport, London. Good morning, sir. Could you step aside, please? I would like to ask you a few questions. Sure, I reply, rubbing the tiredness out of my eyes, putting up no resistance to the familiar drill. My questioner is evidently a government official undertaking extra surveillance following yesterday's terrorist alerts. I found out about the elevated security at London's airports on BBC News before boarding the crowded British Airways flight 14 hours ago. Where are you arriving from today, sir? Dhaka, Bangladesh, I add, thinking that the sun must be setting there about now. And what were you doing in Bangladesh, sir? He says with a monotonous groan, leafing through my passport at the same time. I was there on holiday, visiting relatives. I look over the thin-framed, wispy-haired officer as he begins to examine my documents. His drab suit matches the grey, speckled carpet of Terminal 4's arrivals hall. Passengers silently weave through orderly queues, some speaking in muffled voices, and others looking subdued from jet lag. A total contrast to the cacophony of loudspeaker announcements and disorganisation of Dhaka Airport, where Heathrow's carpets snuffle out noise, the gritty wheels of roller bags and lopsided trolleys click-clack across Dhaka Airport's cracked-up tiles. Back in the first world silence of the UK, I am missing that homely untidiness of Bangladesh, the vibrant colours, the humid smells, and the incessant raising of voices. From his tired attire, I cannot determine whether the officer is from the Metropolitan Police or British intelligence. He has a kind, bedraggled-looking and spotty face. The thinning hair on his head is longer at the sides than on top. The blemishes on the maroon cover of my British passport include a crease that runs all the way down it, like a white water spring descending a craggy alpine mountain. The officer turns the pages with care, separating the leaves with meticulously shaped fingernails. His professionalism and duty to care momentarily cushion me from the cold reality of my travel experiences today, littered as they are with an incessant amount of scrutiny and suspicion over who I am and why I am travelling. He too asks about my reasons for travelling so much, about my family origins, and in particular, about my frequent visits to the Middle East. I work for an international consulting firm and am involved in a number of assignments around the world, so I have to fly around frequently. Plus I travel a lot personally too, to the Middle East and Asia. What about the trips to Syria, sir? And to Lebanon and Jordan? Were these for business also? As he poses the question, I catch him noticing the gold British Airways frequent flyer identification tag dangling from the strap of my knapsack. He cannot tell that I went to the West Bank last year, since at the conclusion of a 9-hour ordeal at the border crossing, I'd requested the Israeli authorities not to put a stamp on my passport, but to do so on a blank sheet of paper instead. Whilst his questioning is thorough, it is nowhere near as forensic as the Israelis, whose methods are purposeful and meticulous, full of mind games. I don't mention the West Bank trip. Mostly those were holiday trips. One trip to Jordan was for business. I wince at the memory of that awful meeting in Amman some months ago, when the executive we were negotiating with walked out of a heated session. Do you have any particular reason for spending so much time in the Middle East? I'm learning Arabic, and I like going to the region to practice. And I go to Saudi Arabia from time to time to perform the Muslim pilgrimage at Makkah. I feel a desire to get this questioning over with and to get out of Heathrow and make my way to London. Where were your parents born? The official asks. My parents, I repeat back, looking at the officer but mumbling the words under my breath. Since childhood, I've been forced to deal with such inquiries, a necessary evil these days for many Muslims who travel a lot, their privilege of anonymity in travel temporarily withdrawn. As time has gone on, I've developed my techniques to a point where I can confidently challenge when needed. You don't really need to know where my parents were born, do you? I reply, nodding my head gently in the direction of my passport, the Queen's coat of arms showing proudly on its cover. I'm employing the same tactic I used successfully when stopped in Milan's Linate airport a few weeks ago. But that was with a smiling and casual Italian immigration officer who just looked like he wanted to practice his English. Today, I fear I've made an error of judgment by challenging this man barely a few weeks after the 7/7 terrorist attacks in London. The officer looks back at me speechless, and as the seconds tick by, I wonder what will happen now. So yeah, I mean, 9/11 did have, I mean, obviously there's a bit more there, but 9/11 did have a real impact, if you like. I mean, perhaps less so now. I mean, you know, I think there were a certain number of years where it had a bigger impact. I think it's a bit better now, I think. But I still do get stopped quite a lot.
Did it make you bitter? Did it make you...
Nah, not at all. Because it's completely practical. I mean, to be honest, and even from that extract you can see it was completely courteous and it was inquisitive. And personally, and again, I'm not saying this is a view that everyone will share, but I feel as though if it's done courteously and fact-based, I think it's understandable. I don't mind being questioned because, I mean, if you look at my passport, it's got lots of stamps on it, so it's fairly understandable that I would get questioned a little bit more. I tend to accept it. I've had some pretty rough experiences. Some of them are covered in the books, and some pretty hilarious ones and some pretty frightening ones. Some of which have been a bit over the top, but overall, I don't ever get bitter about it. To be honest with you, I don't react to it. To be honest, in a negative way. One thing I did want to say actually was that, you know, growing up, I think in Britain, with the tradition of being a Muslim, I think did create some tension. If I may share a bit of that, I think that would be nice. And I think it goes back to Brother Mustafa's opening about identity and identity challenges. So there were all sorts of cultural traditions we had. So I'm Bangladeshi, as you know. So there are, obviously, when we practice religion, we practice it in the context of culture. I mean, religion is practical, you know. So in Bangladesh, there are many practical behaviors and rituals which I would sometimes challenge. And one of them was touching feet. So with the Payabar Salam Kora. So when we were kids, now it's not that prevalent, but when we were kids, for example, it was very prevalent and expected to touch the feet of elders when you meet them. And to even sit down on the floor, touch their feet, and then put your hand here, touch their feet again, put your hand here. And it had become, and then the practice was you do that, and the elder person will say alaikum assalam to you. So this is your way of saying salam alaikum. and then they will say alaikum salam to you. So, you know, as a child, just to give an example, like, this was something which I didn't feel very comfortable about. And I didn't feel comfortable about it because my religious teacher had taught us here that all human beings are equal. You know, no human being should be obliged to lower themselves to another human being. And so, if you don't mind, I wouldn't mind just reading a little bit from that. Because I think this goes to the heart a little bit of being a Western Muslim. Because you see, I think, let me just read actually, and then rather than explain too much, let me just read. So, I need to try and find which page this is on. Page 84. Page 84. And, I'm asking for forgiveness in case I offend anyone. So, I harbored doubts about salam. But by the word salam, I mean touching the feet. We used to call it paye dhore salam kora, which means touching the feet and giving salam.
Okay.
Not right. So, you just see what I say then. Okay. So this is, I'm like 15 years old. 15 years old. I harbored doubts about salam. As soon as I learned from Maulvi Sahib, so Maulvi Sahib means religious teacher, you know, in Urdu. As soon as I learned from Maulvi Sahib that in Islam, any form of submission to another human being was forbidden, the only question that remained around rebellion was when, not if. Only Allah should be revered in such a way, Maulvi Sahib would smile to us in the living room of our house in Grove Park Road. It is not right for us to lower our heads in front of anyone else. Maulvi Sahib was right, but I also understood that touching the feet did not mean one was literally treating the other person as a deity. Islam is so much about the intention and the principle, yet Muslim practice is so much about the practical and the literal. Finding compatibility between these two is an age-old test of life, whether it be for shortening prayers, performing salam, or all sorts of other activities. There are many ways in which we lower our heads to others in forms of deference, not condoned by Islam. The main difficulty I had with salam was the expectation that one had to do it, fueled by symbolism which had gone too far. I dislike the hypocrisy of the action more than the action itself. For example, people from the higher classes would never give salam to those from the lower classes, even if they were younger in age. Salam had everything to do with status, in my opinion, and little to do with true love or respect. And it had nothing to do with religion. Tufel, my middle name is Tufel. Tufel, you must salam anyone senior to your age, even if by a single day. So, why don't we all touch Abdul Latif's feet then? He's older than everyone, I would ask, referring to the barefooted elderly security guard at our house in Dhaka. Neither Amma nor Abba, father or mother, paid attention to my dilemmas over salam. In general, any inclination to probe into the logic of such actions caused irritation and was not appreciated. Amma was unwilling to entertain any discussion that performing salam should be abandoned, and dismissed my attitude towards salam as the frustrations of an argumentative teenager. Some of my cousins had no objection to performing the ritual. To them, touching feet was an understood and acceptable way of showing respect. If the matter came up in conversation as we drove up to a relative's house, Amma would lead, when we went inside, to reinforce her point, offering full salam wherever appropriate. See, Tufel, look, this is how it is done, she would smile. This posturing compounded a desire to hit back at the custom and reject it. One evening in Sylhet, so Sylhet is a small town in the northeast part of Bangladesh, which is where my father's family is from. One evening in Sylhet, without much forethought or predetermination, I cracked. It was at a dinner party at the house of the eldest daughter of the Madhubazar branch of the family. A busy locality some 3 kilometers further into town than Mirabazar, Madhubazar was where Dadu's sister lived. Many prominent members of the family were present. On entry into the lobby, dripping with a few large raindrops caught from another monsoon downpour outside, I began by saying Assalamu alaikum to each relative. I went around to the Murubbi one by one. Murubbi means the elders. One by one, offering my hand to each of the men. The moment was significant to all for being so visible, and my abstinence from standard introductory custom was soon registered. As I continued around more and more relatives, the fact that I was in mutiny became evident, and for Amma and Abba, they approached the acute heat of imminent embarrassment. While I'd questioned Salam for a while, they had never expected that it would come to this. The first accusing glances were cast at my parents, not at me, and without need for words, the looks said, "You two have failed to bring up your children properly in that country where you have chosen to live, where young people do not understand how to respect their elders." So, I just wanted to give an example of how, and again, please, I'm not trying to say what I did was right or wrong, but just to share my experience was that we really struggled with this identity issue in many ways. And we struggled with it because we wanted to find the right way to practice the religion. But when we tried to apply our logic to it, we sometimes also clashed with the culture as well. So it was a very complex situation. I can carry on, but I think let's just pause. Any other comments, or brother, if you wanted to? Yes, please.
Why do you make the issue of touching the faith on the common, most everybody in our select community? Not all. Because, don't take me wrong, I just want to clear that part.
Yeah.
The Chowdhury mainly, they think about them all.
Yeah.
Okay? I'm not Chowdhury. And I against it. My father against it. My grandfather against it. The things is, they make their own rule. Okay? Chowdhury give by.
here.
No. That's why I said don't take me wrong.
Yeah, no, it's okay.
Because the point I let them understand that our all this here. But the Chowdhury, if you go to back history about 100 years old, 8 years ago, there was gift from British the land to get tax from your own people. You see, if you look the whole history of it, then we know it more.
I think the point we were making was
No,
that
what I meant was that because this looks bit down on Muslim, but it's not. Because you respect your mom and dad, that's it. Most of them, when you go to the room, say Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah to all, not one individual.
Yeah.
That's the thing I'm wrong also. I agree with you.
question.
Okay, sorry.
I'm a first generation immigrant.
Yeah.
So my kids are growing up here now. I think they're going through the same experience. I think what you experienced. I feel like for obvious reasons. What do you think in the future? Like, do you will it get better? I mean, obviously for like reasons like 9/11 and stuff like that, there are hiccups for that process to slow down. But what do you think in the future? How will their experience be? I mean, you've got the son as well.
Yeah, I thank you for the question. I think that I think that my main point would be that I think as we grow up with this dilemma of trying to balance different types of identity, it may feel a bit like of a burden, but ultimately I think it will create a greater strength, because I think it will mean that your children will grow up more flexible and more able to adjust to different cultures. You know, whether it's Muslim, whether it's from your country of origin, whether it's from Britain, etc. So I actually think it's very positive. Like, so I guess, you know, my story in a nutshell would be that I've been through 3 stages with this. The first stage would be sort of anguish, pain, you know, like struggle, trying to deal with these identity issues. The next stage for me would be beginning to think that it's actually some advantage, because I can deal with different issues in different ways that sometimes my friends who are from one culture, whether it's a Bangladeshi culture, a British culture, whatever it might be, are less able to deal with that. I suddenly found I've got some strengths. And now is my third stage, I think it's a bit like a superpower. I think it's because I speak a few languages, I'm able to really operate in a way that is given me a bit of a gift. So to be honest with you, I'm very positive about it. And some of the issues that we dealt with when we were kids, like racism and so on, it's much less now. We're past those days. So honestly, I think it's a real advantage, and I'd say that not just for Muslim kids, I'd say for any kids. Is a multiplicity of languages, cultures, of exposure. I think is probably a great asset. Good evening.
Aya, we have a question from Aya.
How did you feel about the mosque when you were younger? Did you connect to it?
Oh yeah, look, I love the way that you're playing around in the mosque, right? I mean, it's amazing. And I must admit, I've experienced this in places like Syria, pre-war. Amazing. The mosques are just absolutely full of people, lots of noise, lots of children playing, families coming together. It's a great thing. So I think that's the mosque experience that I really like and I really enjoy. And I see a lot more of that. When I was a kid, it was a bit more traditional, to be honest, but we don't need to worry about that. I think the mosque experience now is just what we're seeing here, which is great. And I think to be open and to be welcoming to all. So I think the way, brother, you opened up this evening, I mean, many years ago, I used to live in southeast London before I lived overseas, moved overseas. We bought, the community purchased a building, and we went through a very similar process. And we really tried to open the doors and bring in the whole community into the space. So yeah, I think that's how I like the mosque.
Questions?
Did you found that the Quran is more clear when you learn Arabic language?
Oh yeah, thank you for the question. Yes, I mean, as you probably can tell, I learned. I didn't learn Quranic Arabic in the class. I think you correctly understood. I learned Fusha, modern standard Arabic, and then I learned Ammiya, from Dimashq. But it did help me even then. Actually, even the very first lesson, because you see, just to give you a small example, I apologize to those of you who don't follow the Arabic, but we start in Arabic with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of Allah. I never knew what that meant. So I always used to think that Bismillah is like that. I didn't know until my first Arabic lesson that Ism means name, and Bism means in the name. So after learning the very basic of Arabic, I suddenly started appreciating Quran much more. So I would say that I don't understand all of Quran from listening to it, because my vocabulary is not deep enough. But I think I understand the nature of the construction of the narrative more now. So it really helped.
Any other questions? I have a question. So with generation, I heard a new word today. Generation Z. Is that right? So Gen Z. So that's the children probably who are born after 2000. Do you think that they are facing the same kind of border crossings or identity issues that you faced or I faced, or do they have other issues that they are likely to come across?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I might not be the right person to give you the answer, to be honest, but Gen Z, I think that look, I think that the whole idea of being the other, that's not going to go away, right? I mean, that's been with us for hundreds and hundreds of years. It's part of history, right? And I don't think that's going to go away. But maybe the mechanism with which we deal with it and communicate is really going to change. I mean, Gen Z communication patterns are digital and remote, and different communities, different groups interacting with each other in a way that maybe we don't really know from our lives, pre-digital, right? So I think that's going to change. How we deal with it, it's going to be different. but that whole concept of being the other, that I think will still be a challenge. I think that will be a challenge forever, right? I reckon.
It'll be less challenge. Because what we're facing 50 years ago
Yeah.
and now,
Yeah.
day and night different, I would say, from my experience part of it.
Yeah.
Okay? Because 10, 15, 20 years ago, I stood many times in airport. Now,
Because you have a
That's
white
a
beard now.
yeah, because white beard, if you have long beard, yes, they will stop you more.
Yeah.
Especially if you travel from the Middle East, because I've been Middle East and I've been stopped a couple of times. Even from Bangladesh, I've been stopped 3 times. The things it is, when he said Muhammad name, is something clear.
I mean, look, I think one thing that I would say is maybe different. I'm a father now, right? And my Gen Z is sitting right here. Is maybe how we are changing as parents for our children, right? So my wife is not Bengali speaking. She's a Muslim, but she's Gujarati, English speaking, South African origin, but doesn't speak much Gujarati, mainly English. And so because we don't speak Bengali together or any other language other than English, we only speak English together. Our kids speak English as a main language. So, I mean, I tend to view when my kids were very young that English is going to be their main language, and I'm completely happy with that. I don't have an expectation that they will. It would be nice if they learn different languages, also because it'll be more skills for them. But I also understand that they will not be necessarily fluent in Bengali in the way that I am, because the generations have moved on, the circumstances have moved on. So it's also those things as well, I think, around parents. So for me, it's very important that my children appreciate the importance of their faith, 100%. That's really important. But the other things like language, I'm also less worried about. And again, I'm not saying that what I'm saying is right. Others could have a different view. But I'm less worried about the language side of it. But I'm certainly very keen that they maintain and understand the faith.
You know, Prophet Muhammad said, they learn the different languages. If you want to learn the more education, go to China.
Yes.
See? So, many languages even better for ourselves, better for our children.
Yeah.
You know, it's nobody stop you to learn more languages. Like a example, you learn Arabic.
Exactly.
From Sylheti, you learn Arabic. I can speak Arabic.
No, exactly. I mean, we're just to explain what we're doing. So my son and I, so we published this book in a few months ago, and it was launched during lockdown. And you know, we live in Melbourne, Australia, which has had a fairly strict lockdown. And so when the book was launched, I wasn't able to travel even for the launch to anywhere. And so this is an opportunity for us to do a bit of a book launch and traveling. So we landed in Rome from Melbourne about just over 2 weeks ago, and we did a book launch in Rome, an event, and then we did one in Amsterdam, and then we did 3 or 4 in London, and then we've just been around the country for the last few days, and we have a couple more in the next few days, and then we fly back to Australia on the weekend. Now, just to your point about languages, I speak a few languages. I speak 6 or 7 languages pretty fluently. So we landed in Rome, and I was speaking Italian, and we landed in, then we went to another place, and we speak another language. And Hassan, I think, my son, I mean, it's a good opportunity for him just to get that exposure. And I think you're absolutely right. The more languages you speak, probably the more you can communicate. You know, really
Even better. And you get a better job for interpreter. Any question?
I have a question. So when you're at work, or if you're meeting with clients, and someone were to look at you and ask you, where are you from? How would you answer?
Yeah, I love that question because you can answer it so many ways, right? You can say I'm from Melbourne. You can say I'm from consulting. You can say, you know, I'm from PwC. You can say I'm from Bangladesh. You can answer it so many ways. And I love the question because it's basically an opportunity to engage. You know, so I'm never the person who will be upset by that question, thinking, oh gosh, this person, are they asking that because the color of my skin, or they think I'm a Muslim? I don't really think like that. So to me, it's like a great opportunity. Does that answer your question? So, and actually, it's interesting because I think Britain doesn't have this, but Australia, for those of you who've got anybody's been to Australia or experienced Australia? Nobody's been to Australia. So Australia's very politically correct. So this question of where are you from, it never gets asked. It just doesn't get asked. Now, to me, that's a huge loss. Like, if, in the workplace, I mean, we work long hours, we work in teams. How can we work months together without knowing where somebody's from? I mean, I don't really understand that. So recently, what happened in my firm, so I work for PwC, which, as some of you would have heard of it, is one of the world's biggest consulting and business advisory firms. We had a racism incident in PwC, a very publicised one in Australia about 8 months ago. And that incident, I won't repeat the whole incident, it won't help the story, but we had a racism incident that took place in the workplace on a video call. Everyone was locked down, and it hit the newspapers, it hit the press, and it was all over the press in Australia for a few days. Now, what that did was it forced the firm to go somewhere where many of us, including me, I'm a fairly senior partner there, had been pushing for a while, but the firm wasn't going there. It forced the firm to go to, we have to embrace diversity and inclusion in a much more serious way. So the firm then started really beginning to take it seriously. And 8 months in, it started making a few steps. It's not there yet, it started making a few more steps. One of them is to be free to ask, where are you from? Because there is a culture here to expect that any question that's asked like that is coming from a place of respect. It's not coming from a place of disrespect. So if I ask you, where are you from? It's a positive question. So now that's beginning to happen, even at work. But it took something like that to make that step start happening. So personally, I love the where are you from question. Oh yeah.
I got one. I haven't heard any of your reading.
Okay.
But I'm interested to come in.
Yeah, of course.
And I'm enjoying. I live just there. And I'm really enjoying seeing this building come to life. So thank you to everybody for that. And you're helping bring it to life even more. And I would just say, I think it's a good answer to the previous question. Is from Earth. We're all from Earth. So
Yeah, but where are you really from?
wow. Good question. But no, I was going to have 2 meetings in the last 2 days about, well, one yesterday was about social enterprise, and one this evening that I've been delayed by was all about well-being economics, and it sounds like you might know about that sort of thing with your different hats.
Yeah, I'm happy to have a chat about that if you'd like as well. So, yeah, I mean, I mean, just a bit about my work. I mean, I work in the consulting practice. And I work a lot on digitisation of economies. So I advise the Australian government. I've worked a lot with the World Bank and with the UN Broadband Commission myself in Geneva. And I work a lot on that whole digitisation space. I'm an economist by background. But yeah, all of that's really blossoming at the moment. So really happy to chat about that. If you're around still afterwards, we're happy to connect on it.
I don't know, you might have covered that already. I don't know if everybody else is aware of this idea that you can have economics that's not based on money, it's about making people feel better.
I think we should wrap up now. We've got 10 minutes for prayer. We have some books at the back. Brother Mohammad Chowdhury will be doing some signings as well. So if you'd like to have a look at the books or purchase a book, by all means, we've got 10 minutes for bakhlava and some tea to get to know each other, have a little chit chat. And then we'll go down for the prayer. We usually end a meeting with a little bit of recitation from the Quran. So,
والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. Assalamu alaikum. Help yourself to the tea, baklava, and have a look at the books, inshallah. Salam.
Thank you very much. ধন্যবাদ চেলি
Thank you.
তো সিলেটি
জি ভাই।
সিলেটি ফুড বাংলা বলতে পারেন
সিলেটি বলি বাংলা বলি বুয়েটও বলি।
তো বাংলা ঠিক আছে আব্বা মা আছে
আব্বা আম্মা দুজন নাই। আমি একটু বই আছে। আইরম। তোমরা কি আছো না?
ভালো এই তো ভালো আছে বাস yes you can tell Odi Lili, kita buka kan teko deker sanun deu. Saling. Lebih mana?
English for me.
She means
Oh, no. But you know what? It's a good
Haris, get a book if you want. If you want, get it up. Get it.
انا مش اخوان ولا حد مش اخوان ولكن ما دام هم عملوا الدوله الفلانيه والدوله السوريه الله تلزم الافراح قالوا لا تقتلوا ولا تأكلكم الدماء وهو مش اخواني هو تابع لحزب وليس إن
What are you doing? Whose is this?
Friday.
What are you trying to do?
Is it time for Salah? No. 10 more minutes.
علي النعمة أنا جاي لهون أنا جاي لهنا ما فيش إلا ملابس بس فقط لا
Hey.
الحمد لله اللهم لك الحمد.
الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح
What's the main objective?
Our main objective is just talking about dealing with
Muslim was like
I'm writing from the perspective of Muslims.
jobs basically.
I was just saying, I went to the national park in Pembrokeshire, just so I don't know. So really cool.
الله أكبر.
Essen. Yeah, I was just saying, I worked for the national park, and the coast in Pembrokeshire is Lonely Planet voted it the second best coast in the world. So try and get there while you're here.
الحمد لله رب العالمين
Tom.
الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. إذا جاء نصر الله والفتح ورأيت الناس يدخلون في دين الله أفواجا فسبح بحمد ربك واستغفره إنه كان توابا. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين تبت يدا أبي لهب وتب ما أغنى عنه ماله وما كسب سيصلى نارا ذات لهب وامرأته حمالة الحطب في جيبها حبل من مسد الله أكبر سمع الله لمن حمده الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر سمع الله لمن حمده الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر السلام